We have been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms.
All right, so now the peace talks are over. And effectively what happens now is, well, does the war continue or doesn't the war continue? The truth is, though, that if you expected the first round of peace talks to actually yield some kind of result, then you clearly have no idea of anything to do with wars. And that's what I tweeted over the weekend. I said, if you know anything about negotiation, then you know that the first set of talks would always fall apart. I don't think that in the history of world wars, we've actually had the first round of the first meeting in the first round of negotiations actually yield a result. So whereas most people may say the negotiations are finished, I'm saying the negotiations have just started, and this is all part of the program. And today on the show, I'm going to show you what happens next and exactly how markets are going to respond to it. So listen, I've been away, I've been on vacation for the last week. I'm back now and here to bring you a big show. Let's get the show on the road, guys. I did see a whole lot of panic on the weekend where people said, okay, well, the peace negotiations failed and the peace talks are over. Guys, never in the history of wars and never in the history of negotiating peace was a deal ever reached on the first day of the first round of the negotiations. If you don't believe me, just check out these stats. I mean, have a look at these stats over here. So J.D. Vance just announced failed peace talks. And this guy says, I checked how often peace talks deals happen and almost never. So generally you need 3 rounds to 11 rounds of peace talks. And then you need smaller deals along the way. And then even once you get the peace talks, generally the first round of ceasefires and the first round of peace negotiations are actually violated in the beginning. So if you were hoping to get a result in the first round of the talks, well, then you know nothing about markets. And that's exactly why the markets aren't actually responding. So you've had the peace talks break down and you've got the S&P down 0.38%. And even oil is supposed to be the most responsive chart, right? And if you look at where oil was at the beginning of the weekend, so let's just say that oil was here at the beginning of the weekend at 95. Oil is now trading at 98 because the experienced players in the markets know that peace negotiations take multiple attempts and that the first round of the attempts were always due to fail. And if you look at this, like these are just some of the other peace talks that have actually happened, and you can see how long it actually took. This one took 12 years. This one took 7 years, right? And you took the median number of failed attempts before some kind of breakthrough is generally 3 or 4, depending on what sample size you actually look at. So what happens now is that the parties are no longer sitting around a table, and they're both posturing and they're both laying out their views in the media because they've got to justify why they didn't walk away with a peace deal to the people that they're representing. But more than that, they need to send messages to the other side, and they use the mainstream media to actually send messages to the other side. So you've seen some of these messages. The first one is J.D. Vance coming out and saying, look, we can't give up on the commitment to nuclear. And so what he's doing with this is he's basically sending a message to Iran saying, look, there are some things we're not negotiable on. And one of those things is that you cannot have nuclear. And if you come back to the table with any requests that include the fact that you can enrich uranium and basically create nuclear wars, we're not going to accept that. And you can listen to basically how he said it. He said it in the form of a press conference. None of these press conferences are unscripted. None of these press conferences are uncalculated. You need to know that every single move here is very calculated.
Precisely what have they rejected here? Can you help us understand it a little bit?
Well, I won't go into all the details because I don't want to negotiate in public after we negotiated for 21 hours in private. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations. Again, their nuclear program, such as it is, the enrichment facilities that they had before, they've been destroyed. But the simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop
this is not coincidental. They're basically sending messages. And guys, just before we carry on with the show, I have been away for a week, and so the algorithm doesn't really know that I'm here. So I need a favor from you. There are about 800 people watching, and there's about 100 likes. If you smash the like button, what you'll see is that the number of people watching will actually start growing exponentially, and then we can have more fun together in the show. All right, so let's get back to, come on, smash the like button. I'm watching. All right, let's go back to the war. So the US is saying that the talks ended because Iran stopped or refused to offer a commitment not to develop a nuclear weapon. The 𝗕𝗲𝗍𝗵, as you heard, said Iran didn't accept the US terms. The Iran says that they have no plans for additional talks with the US. And of course, that's posturing, because a few minutes ago, we got a sign that, in fact, let me actually see if I've got it for you guys. But the fact that they actually want to come back to the negotiating table. Let me try and find you that tweet. It came out literally a few seconds before the show, and it literally says, as you can see, it says, Iran is willing to continue the discussions with the US. So what am I trying to say to you guys here? This is very, very, very typical in negotiations. And this is one of the toughest negotiations that there's going to be in the world. Why? Because this is Iran. This is a 50-year-old battle that the US and Israel are basically having with Iran. On top of that, the Iranian people are very, very, very smart. They have a very, very, very high IQ. Actually, if you look at the average IQ of the Iranian people, it's a very high IQ. And the hate that they have, or the hate that the regime has towards the United States and vice versa, is very, very, very deep. That makes this one of the most complicated negotiations in the history of the world. And what you got to notice is who the US actually sent to negotiate. So when I look at who the US actually sent to negotiate, I want to show you a picture here. So here we go. So who did the US send to negotiate? The first thing is you got to understand that the people that are negotiating with on the other side are a bunch of academics and a bunch of PhDs, people that are very, very, very versed in negotiations. Now, I'll tell you a little story about negotiations. I spent 3 years at Harvard. I did a postgraduate degree at Harvard, not a postgraduate degree, a postgraduate program at Harvard. And I've always been quite a sharp, shrewd business person, and I always thought that I knew what negotiations were about and how to negotiate. And I tell you that I arrived at Harvard, and in my first year class at Harvard, my lecturer's name was a guy called 𝗕𝗏𝗏 𝗏𝗏. He's a very famous negotiations lecturer and someone who actually gets called into negotiations. And he put us in scenarios which were, I would say, maybe 1/15th, 1/25% of this kind of negotiation. And he put us in scenarios where we were negotiating these kind of things. And I can tell you that these negotiations are so intricate and so complicated. Now, if you look at the US team, who they sent in Vance. Now, I think Vance was much more like a figurehead than an actual negotiator, right? Because I don't think that he has a proven track record when it comes to negotiating. The two people on this team that actually do have a proven track record on negotiating is Trump's son-in-law, which is Jared Kushner, and Trump's old buddy, which is Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff is the legend negotiator. If Trump needs something done, something very complicated done, he sends in Steve Witkoff. Now, the thing about Steve Witkoff and Kushner is that the Iranians they suspect these guys. They don't trust these guys. And the reason why the Iranians don't trust these guys is because the last time they were still negotiating, the US went and bombed Iran in the middle of the negotiations. And so the Iranians are kind of looking at this and going, look, we don't want to negotiate with Witkoff. We want to negotiate with J.D. Vance. But J.D. Vance is, again, I love the guy, but I don't think he's the strongest negotiator in the whole world. Anyway, so right now there is no deal on the table. A lot of people are saying it's over. A lot of people are saying that the peace talks are over. The peace talks are not over. This is the beginning of the peace talks, and they're going to fail multiple times. And if you're gonna sell every time, or if you're gonna panic every time that peace talks fail or posturing fails, you're gonna end up losing a lot of money. You got to be able to see right through what's actually going on, and that's what the market is doing right now. Right, the market is saying, okay, this was supposed to be very scary. There's no more peace deal anymore. What happened to the markets? Because the market is the ultimate source of truth. As I said to you, oil went from Friday being at $95 a barrel and now it's trading at $98 a barrel. And if you look at the S&P 500, the S&P 500 actually is, if you look at the all-time high, which is somewhere over here, the S&P is 2.4% away from its all-time high, and we are in the middle of a war. Okay, now that just tells you that the market is looking straight through this war, and they're saying, we're so tired of all this posturing, and we know that both sides actually need a solution, and they need a solution fast. And that's why you need to look at the markets if you want your source of truth. Right now, what the markets are telling you is that we are not scared. We don't care about all these threats that are basically going on. And we know that everything that's happening in the background is just threats because both sides actually need peace right now. And when I say both sides actually need peace right now, I want to break down that dynamic a little bit, right? The first part of the dynamic is that Trump can posture all he wants, and he has been posturing a lot. And I want to show you just some of the posturing. So Trump's posturing a lot and saying, I expected the markets to go down a lot more than they actually went down. Listen to this.
To stop this country from having a nuclear weapon. You want to see a stock market go down? Let a couple of nuclear bombs be dropped on us, or frankly, any place else. And you'll see a stock market that goes down. So the stock market has not gone down very much at all. Gone down a little bit, much less than I thought. And frankly, the gas hasn't gone up as much as I thought. But regardless, even if it did, we have to stop this group of people from having, and again, it was worse.
So Trump's saying, look, the stock market hasn't gone down as much as I thought the stock market would go down. And he's right. The stock market is pretty much at all-time highs. I mean, this is pretty much scary territory. So the stock market hasn't gone down as much as he said. The oil price actually has gone up. And right now, the way you got to look at it for Trump is Trump needs this war to end. Last time we got, or last week we got their inflation results. I think we got inflation at 3.4% or 3 point something percent, which was 1 percentage point increase in inflation. And this is in the midterm years. So Trump can't afford for the war to actually continue. Another person or country or stakeholder that can't afford for the war to continue is China. Because the longer the war goes on, the more China suffers, right? And China relies on a lot of oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz. And what you will know, or what you've definitely seen, is that Trump has now played 4D chess. Why do I say Trump's played 4D chess? Because he said, look, if the Iranian tool is to block the Strait of Hormuz, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to block the blockage. Because remember, what the Iranians were doing is that they were letting through Russian ships, Chinese ships that paid the tolls, right? And Trump said, no, hold on a second. We are going to block the Strait of Hormuz. So he says, there you have it. The meeting went well. Most of the points were agreed to, but the one point that was not agreed to was nuclear. Effective immediately, the United States Navy, the finest Navy in the world, will begin a process of blockading any and all ships trying to leave the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, and this is what he said to Maria Bartiromo on TV. Just listen to this.
Tell us what you're trying to accomplish with this
blockade,
blockade, sir.
All out. Yep, it's called all in and all out. There'll be a time when we'll have them all come in and all come out, but it won't be a percentage. It won't be a friend of yours, like a country that's your ally or a country that's your friend. It's all or nothing, and that won't be in too long a distance. No, we're just bringing the ships up. We got a lot of ships, so we're bringing them up. We think that numerous countries are going to be helping us with this also, but we're putting on a complete blockade. We're not going to let Iran make money on selling oil to people that they like and not people that they don't like, or whatever it is. It's going to be all.
So basically, he said, look, Iran, if you're not going to be in control of the Strait of Hormuz, the US is going to be in control of the Strait of Hormuz. How? Well, you can make your blockade. We're also making a blockade. No one can pass in and no one can pass out. Not your little ships or little boats that go and drop landmines in the Strait of Hormuz. Not the big ships that you're allowed to pass when they pay the toll money or whatever else. We're putting a big block on the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is 4D chess, and you need to understand why this is 4D chess. The first thing is, he's turned the problem of the Strait of Hormuz into a China, Russia, and anybody else problem, right? Because in the past, it was an America and Israel problem, because Iran decided who goes through and who doesn't go through. And that way, China could carry on forever with like, well, we don't care about this war. Our ships are basically getting through unharmed. But by the US putting a block on the block, then effectively China's now being dragged into this war. So it's a real move of 4D chess, right? So, I mean, just have a look at this tweet, because I think it's quite smart. It says, blocking the Strait of Hormuz with the support of Oman and other Gulf nations may have two objectives. Block Iran's exports and inflow of hard currency. At the same time, make China force Iran to negotiate in realistic terms. Being a strategic partner, they are the most impacted by the shutdowns. And that's exactly that, right? If you look at the amount of oil that Iran has actually sold during this war, I think I had a tweet about it somewhere. I'll try and find that tweet first just now. If you look at the amount of oil, I think they've let 11.7 million barrels of oil actually pass, which is a very big number. This tweet says the following. It says, Trump just flipped the Strait narrative from open it to block it, turning it into an Iran versus the rest of the world pressure test, while oil flows still hold around 80% normal. But the real constraint is structural. Iran cannot push Hormuz too far without hitting China's red lines, since Beijing is the dominant buyer and can either enforce discipline or bypass all routes. This creates leverage in an asymmetric system. So, basically, what Trump has done now is he's dragged China into this war. He says, you know what? You want oil? Well, you better speak to Iran to basically open the Strait. At the same time, now we are starting to see how the pieces have all come together in Trump's master plan, right? I think that before Trump invaded Iran, he did two other things, right? The first thing is he took Venezuela. And remember, what Venezuela has a lot of oil. And what you can see is that they're producing a lot of oil. Look at this article from 25th of March. Is Venezuela oil production has reached 1.1 million barrels per day in March. So remember that before they attacked Iran, number one, Trump said he took over Venezuela. Remember we saw those images of Maduro walking in, etc., etc. And so what you can see, and now Trump's coming out and he's basically saying, hey, we have a lot of oil. The US has a lot of oil. Anyone who wants to buy oil, well, you can buy it from the US. If the Strait of Hormuz is closed, China, if you want oil, we'll give you oil. Listen to what he says. Listen to what Trump says.
We have more oil because of drill, baby, drill. We have more oil than Russia and Saudi Arabia put together. So if you look at Russia and Saudi Arabia, two big ones, we have much more oil than they have put together. And what's happening is boats are coming over here, filling up. We don't have to go through the Hormuz.
So look, I mean, if you want to look at it that way, wait, let me just go back to it. So people said Trump pulled off the largest shift in global power. Trump essentially burned down the competition and said America is open for business as oil tanks are coming in to fill up from America. And at the same time, they're doing this through with very high oil prices. So every barrel that the US now sells, they're selling at, I'll show you exactly the number that they're selling it at. And remember, this is not a spot number. This is, I think, slightly US oil, $103 per barrel versus normal Brent oil, which is $98 per barrel. So you can go to the US and you can go and fill up your thing. And because of the drill, baby, drill, and all the fracking and whatever else, in the US, they now actually have a lot of oil. So this tweet says, by securing oil in Venezuela and blocking the Strait of Hormuz, Trump has effectively taken control of the world oil supply by forcing countries to buy oil from the USA, which is an absolute masterclass by Trump. So that's where we're at. I think the peace negotiations haven't failed. I think if you think that the peace negotiations are over, then you don't know anything about international politics or anything about negotiation. I think that the negotiations have just started, and there's going to be a lot of message sending from one person to another person. So there'll be message sending from the Iranians to the Americans, from the Americans to the Iranians. And I think within a couple of weeks, we'll have some kind of peace deal. At the same time, you'll see a lot of posturing, right? You'll see a lot of you'll see the US sending in more supplies, which is exactly what's happening. You may even see one or two strikes happening just to remind them that we still have targets. You may see big what do you call it? Big supplies coming to be refilled. So that's what's basically going to happen. All right, let's talk a little bit about crypto and the war and what's going on in the crypto world, because we've spoken a lot about wars, but we haven't really spent a lot of time about crypto because the war has actually been top of mind and has been actually moving the markets. But I do think that we need to look at a couple of things. The first thing is, I think we have to still celebrate how well Bitcoin is doing since the beginning of the war. It's still the best returning major asset since the beginning of the war. You can see it was this morning, as when I did this chart, it was up about 12%, or when the researchers did the chart. Because I wouldn't know how to do a chart like this. Even if I wanted to, I could never do a chart like this, just so you know. That's why I have researchers. Yeah, believe it or not, I would never be able to do a chart like this. But what you can see from this chart is that Bitcoin is the best performing asset since the beginning of the war. It is currently doing, I think, quite well, 71,250. For me, look, for as long as we're in this wedge, we're in the wedge. We may go up to 77, we may come down to, should drag this a little bit more, but we may come down to somewhere around 67, 68,000. But as long as we're in the wedge, we're in the wedge, and it's pretty much a non-event. My hope, and it is something that I'm looking for, and you can see that there is relative strength here, is that we actually go up and we break this wedge and we break the pattern. But I mean, we're still a long way away from it. Also, remember that the majority of the price action here was Michael Saylor buying $1 billion last week, right? So if you look at the purchases, Saylor bought $1 billion worth of Bitcoin last week, and that's all by selling the STRCs. So for me, I don't get excited by that. I don't get excited by the fact that Bitcoin's going up when there's one buyer in the market. I want to see millions of buyers in the markets. But you know what? We'll take what we can get, and we want to break that wedge. So someone said Bitcoin just reset its leverage without losing price. So we flashed all the leverage and we didn't lose price, which is quite good. I do want to talk a little bit about this though, because this actually, I don't want to say it worries me, but there was another hack today. Today in hacking news, hackers minted 1 billion DOT on the Ethereum mainnet and they sold them off. And I don't really care about DOT or the Ethereum mainnet. This was a hack through a bridge. But I do want to say that, we had Drift being hacked a week ago. We're averaging 9 DeFi hacks per month in the last 6 months. Okay, and this is before AI. So we have very limited AI now. And I don't know how many of you have been following, but there's Anthropic has this model called Mythos, right? And Mythos is so powerful that they actually, in inverted commas, I'm gonna say they're scared to release it. And so what they've done is they've created like they've taken the 40 biggest companies and they've given them access to Mythos, and they're saying, look, before we actually release this to the public, take this model and explore vulnerabilities into your code, etc., etc. Now, there are two schools of thought here, but I think we need to pay attention to it. The one school of thought is that they actually do have a model that is actually that powerful. The second school of thought is that they're just amazing marketers. And when you say you've got a model that is so powerful that you cannot release it to the outside world, then the outside world's they're basically salivating. They want your model, right? So, salivating around models is not really a good analogy here, but maybe later on, Hardest, you can bring your phone and we can salivate around models together, right? Otherwise, I've got my phone, yeah. So I do think that that DeFi is entering a new era. And a new era that I mean here is that you don't actually have to be a very good hacker, because you can use Claude, and you don't even have to use Mythos. You can use a whole lot of other AIs, and anybody can effectively become a hacker. Now, the problem is that the hackers become super hackers because they now have like multiple AI agents looking for vulnerabilities, etc., etc. So I do think we're entering into a new era, and I don't think that new era is very good for DeFi. And why? Because there are so many vulnerabilities that can be picked up in smart contracts and stuff like that I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a very, very good time for DeFi, unless DeFi can offer like supernormal returns. But right now, DeFi isn't offering those supernormal returns. What else is there today? Okay, so a couple of other things. First of all, guys, there is a trading competition. And the purpose of this trading competition is not for everyone to make life-changing money, but it's to show people that there are ways to make money in a bear market, right? And if you want to enter this trading competition, you don't have to enter with a lot of money. It's just more, to be honest, for me, this trading competition is much more practice. It's around training yourself to know how to trade in a bull market and in a bear market, and at the same time having fun with us every day, and also a chance to win $120,000. So if you want to join, there is a link below. There's a link below here. Let me show you the link. Let's just click here. There's a link below here. So yeah, there's a link below here. Remember, Blowfin is a non-KYC exchange, so you can pretty much do it from anywhere, and you can just sign up and join the trading competition. Just use this link below. Also, guys, a lot of you asked me where I was last week. So just some fun stuff. Last week I was actually away playing in a polo tournament. I was actually in a very nice place in South Africa called Plettenberg Bay, that's literally the house we were staying at. We were literally on the beach. It was absolutely amazing. I mean, this is really one of the most beautiful places I've ever stayed at. We played in a polo tournament. So that's the polo team. We actually played in 2 separate tournaments, which is part of the same tournament, so to speak. So that's actually my team. That's actually my horse. This horse is called Only Red. Very, very good horse, but the horse actually went crazy. I couldn't actually ride the horse when I was there. It was so crazy. But I mean, the good news is, guys, we won the tournament. We won the tournament. So we won the thing. So if you guys want to, that's the same horse. It's called Only Red. One of my favorite horses. If you want to follow me on Instagram and you want to see the other side of my life, which is not, I mean, sometimes I post work updates and stuff there, but this is more what else I do. You can follow me on Instagram. There is a link below on Instagram. I'm CryptoManRan. On Twitter, I'm CryptoManRan. Follow me on both places if you want to see the other side, the non-crypto side. Is there anything that I've left out here? Is there anything that I've forgotten about? Let's see. Is there any? I mean, you guys saw these pictures. Yeah, this is one of my other horses. This is a horse called Lollipop, which is one of my other horses. Also a very good horse. That's my mom. Anyway, guys, I will see you guys again tomorrow. Until then, trade well, my friends.